they reacted in a negative way when that ruling came out. I'm like, look, it's more important that the Constitution is upheld than any individual, right? That's how it works here. So your individual opinion is of no great consequence to me, frankly.
Let's go.
Welcome to Citizen. We got a special guest today, Lee Habeeb from Oxford, Mississippi, which I just learned that's a thing. I didn't know anything about that.
Well, it's a beautiful little town tucked under Memphis, home to Ole Miss, and an underdog in a big conference, the SEC, but fair and well. Good football program, won the World Series in baseball a couple of years ago, and have some great young coaches who don't know we're not a big SEC school, and I love that.
Yeah, well, I mean, Tennessee won this year. As a matter of fact, it was only ACC and SEC teams even in the World Series this year, which is that's new.
Yep. Pretty crazy.
You said you moved there 16 years ago. Where did you live? But where did you grow up?
I grew up in northern New Jersey, migrated down to Washington, D.C. when I went to law school with Laura Ingraham at the University of Virginia, and we started a little national radio show together. And it got big fast. And a lot of the things we're arguing about today, a lot of the things that happened in the Supreme Court this week, Laura and I were discovering in law school, particularly, I don't know if you know anything about or what your audience knows about the Supreme Court, but some really big things happened in the Supreme Court. And so I've been involved in, sort of freedom movement in the country for a very long time.
Sure.
Really love the Declaration of Independence, love the Constitution too. And so, that was my life for a good deal of my life until I started this show, Our American Stories, which has been picked up by Premier Networks on iHeart, and it's just exploded. And we just tell the story of America to Americans, and everything from sports to business to music to the arts, to history itself and war and to faith. And the story behind the story. No politics, because we don't need to put a thumb on the scale. American history is too beautiful to bother, but we're not a bad country. We're a good country. We're not a perfect country. We've made mistakes, but where else would somebody want to move to? We know that. Look what's happening at our border. I don't like it. I don't think many Americans do, but it is testimony to one thing. They're coming here from everywhere, and they want a piece of the American dream, and they just need to come legally.
Yeah, it's this. What you're referring to, I guess, is the 1619 Project, but it's broader than that, right? And our audience is pretty familiar with this stuff. It is like a concerted effort to I guess, criminalize the American experience to some degree. Like it's where you should feel a certain kind of way about being an American, and it shouldn't be good. That's what they want you to experience. And I think it's an offshoot of, I don't think, I know for a fact that this is how Russian propaganda works, right? It's been an considered effort going on for quite some time now. And, it's funny. It's funny how easily people are duped by some of this dumb shit, to be honest. It's like, and one of the best ways, I know we're not this, we get into politics sometimes in this show, but this show is mostly about don't rely on politicians for anything. American first principles are what matter, right? But it has become political to some degree because just with the Russia thing, I mentioned Russia. So Bush administration, Russia invades Georgia. Obama administration, Russia invades Crimea. Biden administration, Russia invades Ukraine, and somehow that makes Trump a Russian agent. Right. So I'm not sure.
Math, huh?
Yeah, I'm not sure how that math works exactly, but it's odd to me to see how easily people are duped. And I think it's just because, I've said this since 2020 about stolen elections and stuff, and maybe there is some fire there. There's certainly a lot of smoke, but you don't have to hack a voting machine if you can hack somebody's brain, right?
Yeah, of course. Of course. And look, a lot of this has to be put on the shoulders of the American people themselves, us, right? We didn't even know what our schools were teaching for the last 50 years. My dad was a superintendent of schools. He was an amazing high school basketball coach. And his idea of a summer field trip for the family was the Lewis and Clark Trail, or let's say Gettysburg to Vicksburg. That was a fun family outing. I actually thought it was fun. My brothers and sisters thought they were hostages during the whole trip. But what I had learned early was this country is amazing. And it's a constitutional republic. I like to ask young people, what is this thing called America? And they'll say it's a democracy. And I'll say, I got something better for you because democracies are mob rule. Let me tell you what our founders were getting at. They believed that we needed to separate power, and that the Constitution was a framework. And so they believed that we needed 2 years in the lower house, 6 years in the upper chamber, just in the legislative branch. The executive branch was a separate branch. It wasn't a creature of the parliament or the legislative branch like most of the free world. It's its own separate branch. That's 4 years. Wow. 2 years, 4 years, 6 years. Then there's this independent judiciary. And then there are these 50 states with their state constitutions. And each of them is their own little republic. And this was all meant to disperse power, to make the people sovereign. And the battle for this country from the beginning, look, one of the best stories we tell, and it's now, our audience has demanded this a few times a year, because everybody says America's never been more divided. And we're going, oh, how silly. Let's take 1776. The Declaration of Independence is about to be commissioned by none other than Benjamin Franklin. He heads the committee, and he chooses Thomas Jefferson to write this document. But at that time, 1/3 of Americans were with independence, 1/3 were with the Loyalists. That is, they were with the British government. They were with the Crown and the royal governors, and 1/3 were hiding under their tables, hoping it would fly and pass over. In the end, Ben Franklin joins the Patriots, but his son, William, and his son, by the way, who you've seen in pictures with Ben Franklin holding a kite, an illegitimate child, by the way, in which Ben Franklin never reveals the name of the mother and does something men didn't do back then. He raised his illegitimate child. Well, he raised him so well that William became the royal governor of New Jersey. So Ben Franklin tells his son, look, son, you're going to have to resign your commission and swear allegiance to the Patriots in the Declaration. And the son says, no, Dad, you've got it backwards. If you sign that document, you're signing your death warrant, and there's nothing I can do about it. Ben Franklin and the Patriots had the royal governors thrown in jail and thrown in the Litchfield Gaol in Connecticut. This was the worst jail in America. The two would never talk again. The father disowned the son. So when I hear these things like, well, we got to compromise, we couldn't compromise during the Civil War. There was nothing to compromise. In the end, a fight had to happen. Now, luckily, we don't need bayonets and muskets now, though I'm a big Second Amendment guy. Our voting at the voting booth, that's where we'll determine what happens in the next decade. And I'm making a promise. The progressive wing of the Democrat Party has lost its mind. And it's going to cost traditional Democrats a long, long road, as it did from 1968 all the way until you got a moderate like Bill Clinton into the office. And in the meantime, we have a Supreme Court that wants to return power back to the American people. And it's done that after case, including the most important decision, I think, in the last 50 years. And that's the Chevron case, in which essentially the Supreme Court told Congress that they can't defer to unelected bureaucrats decisions like how many electric vehicles there should be, or whether there should be coal, or any of the things that our unelected bureaucrats are doing to us without our consent. And that case is historic, it's a landmark, and it's going to change the country as we know it and return a lot of power to where the power always belonged, with we the people. And If you wouldn't mind, I might add this. Our Supreme Court, the Catholics on that court don't like abortion, but they did something interesting. They said it's not our decision to make when a life begins. That's up to the people of each state. Last year, 1 year after Dobbs, there were more abortions than there were in any time in recorded history. So the fact of the matter is, anyone who calls himself a real conservative wants Berkeley to be Berkeley and Birmingham to be Birmingham, Austin to be Austin, New York City to be New York City, and let people live as they live. Live and let live is a credo at the bottom line of what and how the founders thought and conceived of their country.
Yeah, I think so. A couple of points you made about, let's call it outright democracy. The Athenians tried this 2,000 years ago and shut it down after about 2 years, right? Because it was stupid. Yeah. And it's like, let's be frank, the average person isn't equipped to handle that situation. And yeah, I don't. This our democracy thing is a relatively new talking point for the left. I don't understand it. I mean, it does play. I guess we just need better civics classes in the U.S. because people just sincerely don't understand what the hell we're doing here. But I want you.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Senate. As somebody who is involved in government, constitutional law, whatever, the Senate is elected now by the people, but that wasn't always the case. Can you
No, it
can you
wasn't.
explain to the audience here how it was, how the Senate was originally elected, what the purpose of that was, and how it's changed as a result of the new form of election?
Well, look, I mean, it goes back to what the founders thought in general about being closest to the people. So it was ultimately, in the end, to make it not so complicated, it was one branch, it was one part of the assembly electing the other part. But then, as the great James Madison said, the Senate was the cooling saucer. It was not a direct elected body, but it was sort of a representative body. And by the way, all of our government is a representative government, which is a very big difference than a direct democracy. And in the end, that's what our founders were up to with the Senate. And also what they were up to in the Senate with the New Jersey Compromise was to make sure that there were 2 senators for big states and 2 senators for small states. We wouldn't have had a constitution without that. Why would the little states have wanted to be run over with proportional representation in what was known as the lower chamber, and that would be the House? And so all of these compromises and all of these vagaries that Americans don't know now are fundamental to why we're the oldest functioning constitutional republic in the world by a long shot, and why we've had so much stability. Like Trump, don't like Trump. Next election. Like Reagan, don't like Reagan. Next election. Love Obama, don't love Obama. The real problem has been all the power that unelected bureaucracies have gathered since about the 1960s and 70s, particularly the 70s. It was a wild time. Congress was basically saying, I don't want to make the tough calls on the environment. I think I'll punt it to the EPA. And the next thing you know, 50 years later, you have the head of the EPA telling American car companies how many electric vehicles they make. And I'm sitting there watching this going, who made that guy the king of cars? The king of the automotive industry. He doesn't care what the demand is. He doesn't care what the customers want. He doesn't care what Congress wants. He's issuing an edict from above. And the good news is that pretty much is over. Great news, actually.
Yeah, that's good news. It's really odd to me that leftists read returning power to the states or to the people from the federal government as an assault on their liberty, right? Like this. So one of the things Biden's campaigning on is Trump is going after women's rights. It's like, no, he's just respecting the Constitution. There's a lot of stuff he does I don't agree with. For example, bump stocks, which he lost in the Supreme Court, technically, right?
Yeah.
That was dumb on his part. But you know, most of my friends, I think, don't really care about the abortion issue that much anymore. I think my generation is kind of muted on that particular issue. So they reacted in a negative way when that ruling came out. I'm like, look, you still like this is it's more important that the Constitution is upheld than any individual, right? That's how it works here. So your individual opinion is of no great consequence to me, frankly. And you can move to a different state and do that if you want, or you can just, not get abortions, right? I mean, you still there's plenty of options there, but it's just so weird to me how there's like this, I don't know, it's almost like dominatrix fetish that people have with the federal government where they want to get, like govern me harder, daddy, that whole thing. That is not very American. Like to me, America is the simple idea that individual liberty and personal entrepreneurship are the ultimate inoculation against tyrannical bullshit. And that's kind of how we wanted this whole thing to work out. You can fucking trade with him. You guys mind your business, don't hurt anybody, and you're all good to go, right?
Yep.
We have a very limited, feeble, ineffectual federal government that does a couple of things, border security and the military maybe, and leaves us alone for the rest of it. But it's grown into a behemoth now. Now, you mentioned Chevron. That is, it may not be politically, but legally, probably the biggest Supreme Court decision of my lifetime.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you might enumerate exactly what this Chevron decision said and what it led to over time, and then now what the difference is going to be.
It started, look, Richard Nixon, a Republican, started the Environmental Protection Agency in the early 1970s. And the idea was, these people would watch the environment. They'd watch for pollution. Rivers cut between, the Mississippi goes through a lot of rivers. So some guy pollutes in Minnesota, it could affect us here in Mississippi. Not a terrible idea, right? Not all ideas that originate in some additional government power are terrible. And let's remember, the Constitution was formed because the Articles of Confederation didn't work, right? There was no centralized government. Washington couldn't pay his troops. So we have to agree as a baseline that we need some degree of federalism, and we also need some degree of centralized power. The argument ever since between Hamilton and Jefferson has been how much power stays in Washington and how much retains in the states. We've been having that fight for a long time. What happened in the 70s is the administrative agencies got bigger and were sometimes making tough calls about the environment. Congress decided to sort of write vague statutes. And what I mean by vague is they will purposely write a statute that's hard to pin them down on so they can allow somebody else to make hard calls on, let's say, the amount of lead in water. Congressman might not want to get into that. So he basically says, look, the EPA made this ruling, Mr. Constituent, and it's out of my hands. What he was doing essentially was deferring decision-making that was relegated to Congress by the Constitution to these unelected bodies. Now, when I was in law school, Laura Ingraham and I and a few others, this was what we were dreaming would one day get overturned because these unelected bureaucrats had seized that power, taken more. By the way, Democrats never minded. It was conservatives who minded when they would get into power. Ronald Reagan put Bill Bennett in charge of the Department of Education, was trying to winnow that down, make it smaller. Well, 90% of that bureaucracy was lifelong Democrats. And they were dragging their heels. They weren't listening to their boss. The executive branch had become a creature not of the presidency, but of its own wishes. It had become its own power source. And then when Democrats got back into power, they simply expanded that power. So that's, in a nutshell, what Chevron did. It basically said to Congress, you can't defer power, regulatory power, and taxing power. And by the way, lots of regulations piled on themselves are the equivalent of taxing power because somebody has to pay a cost for that. Somebody has to do the cost-benefit analysis, and it's Congress that has to do that. Only Congress can raise taxes. And so, in essence, Chevron was returning the power to the Congress and not allowing Congress to defer it. Because your audience needs to understand this. Congress purposely gave that power to the administrative state so it didn't have to deal with a lot of hard political calls.
Yeah. By the way, Congress still in the post-Chevron world, if we're going to call it that, Congress still has the ability, even the right, to consult with all of these experts in the executive branch agencies or freelancers or whomever else before they write and then vote on these bills. Like that, there's no prohibition to doing that. So the result of Chevron ultimately was just to remove accountability from the people we can actually vote for, right?
Yes.
That's really
you pass that bill, I'm firing you.
Yeah, that's it, right? Like I can look at your voting record and see you voted on this bullshit, you're gone. Here's what I think it's simple. Americans who understand the Constitution simply want the legislative branch to make laws, the judicial branch to adjudicate whether they're constitutional or not, and the executive branch to apply them exactly as written, right? That way everybody's held accountable to some degree. That's the checks and balances. The whole narrative right now is that checks and balances have been removed. The judicial branch has given itself ultimate power. No, it hasn't. As a matter of fact, if the Supreme Court rules that the ATF, for example, can't just make a new law and turn millions of Americans into fucking felons overnight for no reason, the judicial branch can say, no, that's not right. You don't have the ability to do that. If Congress goes out and passes a law that says that bump stocks or pistol braces or whatever are illegal, then you have now there's a conversation to be had, right? That'll never happen, obviously, because they'll never have that kind of majority to do something like that, which is the fucking point.
It is the point. And then the other point is that no matter what majority you get together, the Bill of Rights were the ultimate counter-majoritarian, anti-democratic principle. No matter how many people gather in Mississippi to take away my right to free speech, they could pass any law they want. The Supreme Court's going to say, you can't do that. Sorry. These are certain embedded principles, values, rights that cannot be circumscribed by any convening legislative power. That's why we're here, to protect minority rights. Crazy idea.
Yeah, it's weird. Now, I want to get on to something else about people are in a, man, there's a lot of conversation lately about expanding the court. And I've heard good reasons and I've heard bad reasons. The bad reasons are obvious. It's just political. Like they're going to steal our democracy, whatever the fuck that means. It's nothing, right? That's a nonsensical phrase. But one argument I've heard is that at the time when the Supreme Court was, I think it was reduced to 9, as a matter of fact. I think it was 11 or 13 before, and it was reduced to 9. There were 9 district courts in the U.S., and there's now 13 district courts. And they say, well, Supreme Court should reflect the district courts. I don't know what the purpose of that would be necessarily. I don't know that it would hurt to have 13 versus 9, but it's clearly just like you've never heard this argument before until now, when they're losing everything, right?
Yep. Well, this is the point, right? If it appears that one party is trying to advantage itself while in power, expanding that number of folks, as Roosevelt, look, if it weren't for one senator, Roosevelt would have gotten away with it. And one Democrat senator said, look, we can't pack the court, sir. Sorry. Now, it wasn't an expansion of the court. It was something slightly different. But the fact of the matter is, what we don't want to do, and I wouldn't want Republicans to do this and conservatives, but Republicans and conservatives never have. It's Democrats who think about this only when they're in the minority. And then suddenly it's a constitutional crisis. Meanwhile, Chevron case was ruled on while Reagan was president, but the court was still liberal. So many of the laws that essentially the Supreme Court passed, and literally they were passing laws for 20 years, out of control. The conservatives had to sit there and go, well, maybe one day we'll have our turn. Maybe there'll be more of us than them. This balance of power has done the country well. So whoever decides to expand the court is going to have to live with the legacy of, okay, we get 4 more, it should be 13. Well, then the other guy wins and goes, we want 7 more because we want 20 and we'll appoint the 7. Then the other guys win, they'll go, we're down 6, we'll have 8 more. And then, 100 years from now, we have a Supreme Court with 270 judges and it's Congress. Right? And so that's what I tell people. Why we haven't changed it. Why did you want to change it? You guys were in control for 30 years. The Warren Court was a long time, a long time. And so now we have the Roberts Court. And hey, at least Roberts periodically votes with the left and the more liberal judges. And many of the so-called conservative judges split and debate. When's the last time you saw Sotomayor and Ginsburg split before Ginsburg died? Never. The left votes together much more than the conservative judges vote together. And I'm proud of that, actually.
Sure.
I like that our guys disagree. It's healthy. Their side rarely disagrees. Rarely.
Yeah. It's, you mentioned Sotomayor. I think she's just a DEI hire, frankly. I think she's the dumbest member of the court. We'll see on Ketanji Brown Jackson how she develops over time. She couldn't figure out what a woman was, but that's politics. I don't think she's a dumb person. I literally think that Sotomayor is a dumb person because today, in her dissent, so Trump immunity case has been resolved. He's granted immunity for official acts, as is all future presidents, right? You can feel how you want to about that. We'll unpack that over the next couple of months and see what it really means because I think it's always important to imagine whatever victory you've had in the hands of your enemy and see how that feels to you. But her response, and she actually wrote this in the dissent, which is insane to me, is that if the president orders Navy SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival, immune. So there's something called posse comitatus that prevents U.S. military from operating on U.S. soil, right? It's a matter of law. And you would think that one of the top lawyers in the country would fucking know that. But no, that's part of her. That is a dissent written into one of the biggest cases in American history. That's in there. One of the 9 justices we've decided are going to adjudicate law for every 350 million Americans, and she doesn't understand how the basic fucking law works. That is a real problem.
It's tragic. It's tragic, but it's also understandable. Look, I went to a law school UVA law school in 1988, and I could see it moving far to the left even then. And so what I often have an appreciation of, and I'm not making an apology for her, is many of the top flight jurists in this country have never really been properly, let's just say, inculcated with American history or American life. They're simply very ideological, and they don't know a lot about American life and American history. And that's a tragedy. And that's a tragedy for all of our judges. Nobody's teaching this stuff anymore. And it will get reflected in Supreme Court opinions, too. I've seen this happen more on the left than on the right, but I've seen it sometimes in very disappointing ways with some of my favorite judges who also say, oh, but that's not what John Adams wrote. That you missed that point about the military. You missed that point. The fact of the matter is we're not educating in our high schools, in our colleges, and most certainly not in our law schools. It's all what's my narrative and how do I plug it in? And that's a shame. What I love about originalism is it's not my narrative. Scalia hated flag burning. But when a Vietnam protester burned a flag during a march, Scalia called it what it was. It was political speech. You may not like it. Scalia hated it. But he said, I'm going to give that guy who defended his country the right to do that. So we can make all kinds of claims about Scalia being a patriot or not a patriot. What he was doing, and what I love about originalism is it says, what did the founders mean? What did they mean by a sort of a right built into the Constitution against search and seizures? And okay, there wasn't the internet now, but if there was, how would we apply that principle, right? And that's a no-brainer. They didn't want you to search a house, so they don't want you to search your ISP address without a warrant, right? This is simple. Principles don't change. Technology might. So what I love about our Supreme Court now, the majority, is they tend to often vote against their own values in respect for the principles and the text of the Constitution. Well, that's a true constitutionalist in my mind.
That's the job.
That's the job.
Right? It's not, and I tell people this all the time. I think it maps nicely onto, onto policing, right? So
yes.
The Supreme Court has ruled that cops have no legal duty to actually help people, right? That's a weird thing to say out loud, but that's a fact. They've ruled that that's the case. So, do with that information what you will. But most cops do, on a routine basis, put themselves in the line of fire for other people.
Of course.
And they get into these shoot situations, and a lot of them are fucked up. I'm pretty harsh on them because I've been in quite a few of those situations myself. Not in this country, obviously. But I think a similar. I don't think policing and war are the same, but I do understand how somebody can go from a potential friendly to an enemy very quickly. No uniform and all that stuff, right? I've experienced that. The reason we hold these people to such a high standard is because we've put you out in charge of other people's liberties to some degree, and you've given you a gun to enforce that shit, right? So what you do and how you react to that power is really important. And sometimes, and I've said this about the conflict in Israel as well. I don't like dropping bombs on cities. I think that's kind of a bitch move, frankly. Pick up your kit, get your rifle and your grenades, and go into the city and start fucking shit up.
Get in there.
And do whatever you want in that regard. If you fucking kit up and go into the city, do whatever you want.
Right.
But the concept of protecting life, protecting rights, all of that stuff is more important than my life as a soldier or my life as a cop or whatever, right? And I think maybe it's not life or death in the court, but for some people, to some degree it is. Like, it affects generations of people when you pass certain laws. And I think, it is good when people can put their own personal feelings aside. And to be honest, a good court is going to have everybody pissed off, I think, right?
I think,
just like a good journalist is going to piss off everybody.
Exactly right. And I'll tell you that one of the stories that we've put in our best ofs is John Adams' story as it related to the Boston Massacre. So
Mm-hmm.
John Adams is a farmer. He only goes to Harvard for one reason, a scholarship. He's not a rich kid. He's not, like many of the Harvard students, sons of
Yeah.
wealth. And it
He
was
also went
divinity
back to
school.
being a farmer after his presidency. He just was like, all right,
That's
I'm going to go
right.
farm again.
That's exactly right. Longing to return to civilian life.
Mm.
But there was no law school then, right? So he didn't go to Harvard Law for his degree. He went to Boston. He was an intern essentially for a long time till he passed the bar. He builds up a nice little practice in Boston. And in 1770, well, the troops are starting to get quartered. And nobody likes these redcoats, but they're there. And they're there legally under the current law, which is the king's law in parliaments, right? And they're not liked. And one night, there's a bit of bawdiness. There's a lot of drinking. It seems like there's a fire alarm. Everybody races out, and there are these redcoats. And then there are some shots fired, and there are some dead Americans. And, well, most of the colonists wanted these guys strung up. But it was John Adams, the only lawyer in Boston who would take the case of the redcoats. And by the way, that line that we all know, facts are stubborn things, came from the opening of his trial defending them. What he did is he started to do the investigation. And most of the redcoats were firing in self-defense. That's what we learned. And a couple didn't. So a couple went to jail and most didn't. And by the way, George Washington was watching that. And what he saw was a man willing to risk some short-term business for long-term integrity. And Adams' closing statement is a masterpiece. Anyone can go and look it up. But he basically said, if we're going to be the country we claim to be, then the presumption of innocence is a bedrock principle that goes back before the Magna Carta to God and man himself at the beginning of time, right? And that we were allowed to confront our witnesses in a trial. And there need to be 2 or 3 more witnesses, and we are not going to deprive somebody of their life and liberty without an overwhelming show of facts and evidence to do so. So here's John Adams talking about what we're talking about right now, and it's half the reason, there are many other reasons, that he became George Washington's vice president. He was a man of tremendous character and integrity, and he put it in action. He didn't just talk about these words. That is integrity itself. And by the way, this was the ACLU right up until the 1980s, when the ACLU Illinois chapter defended the neo-Nazis, right, to march in Skokie. And it was Jewish lawyers who did it. And we put on David Goldberger on our show. We called him a hero because he didn't, as he put it, and told all the Jews he knew, I'm not defending the neo-Nazis. I'm defending the First Amendment, period. Take away their rights. Who's next? Who's next?
Yeah.
These are, by the way, when I go into schools and high schools and colleges and I describe this kind of idea, the Voltaire idea, I disagree with you, but I'll fight to the death, your right to have your opinion. They're really shocked that that's a conservative view now and not a liberal view. And I think we just have to do more educating and, more importantly, more storytelling.
Sure,
because these stories are powerful. They're not just ideas, what John Adams did.
Yeah.
It was a search for truth. The mob doesn't care about truth. It doesn't care.
Yeah, the mob is this is why we have leaders, right? It's why we require that great men stand up in times of peril, is to make sure that we don't overreact to things, or sometimes to make sure we have the courage to react to them at all. I mean, the American Revolution doesn't begin when it does if John Adams doesn't take that case, because the fallout of the case is the Crown is not too thrilled with having their troops tried by an American legal system.
That's right.
So they brought all of the like any further adjudication between a British politician or soldier had to be brought back to London for a trial,
London.
right? And John Adams was like, you know what? I put my life on the line. I live here. My life and my family's life, I put it on the line to defend you assholes, and now you're going to fuck us over? Like, nah, we're not doing that.
Yeah.
We're not doing
By
that.
the way, we also proved that we can do free and fair trials here. You jerks.
Incredible.
Yep.
And it's, I mean, these are the stories of like the straight white male Christian these days comes in for a lot of grief, I suppose. I mean, it's still pretty decent to be one, I think. Like a lot of it could be overblown, but it is the primary target of what we mentioned before, the 1619 Project. These people who want to rewrite American history as though all white people all the time were evil slave owners or whatever the fuck, right? It was the, I believe, maybe the Presbyterian white church that started the abolition movement. So that's going to be a hard one to argue. But
I mean, there'll be a bunch of denominations fighting over that. The Free Baptists are going to say, the Quakers are going to say it. The fact of the matter is, white Christians, starting with Wilberforce in England and all over the United States, not only led the abolition charge. You go to Hillsdale College, where I think they had 44 boys strap up out of 80, and you look at their letters. By the way, there were 4 Medal of Honor winners. Boys lost their life fighting to end slavery. That's what they wrote. And they didn't just write it in their letters to their families saying they may not come home, but why they were fighting. Because God didn't intend for men to own other men. Remarkable and beautiful. Story not told. Why it's not told, who knows? And by the way, the other story is that slavery was utterly ordinary. That the African slave trade was working in collusion with the Ottoman Empire, with the whole world, including other African countries. This doesn't make it right that we did it, but only that the human abolition machine started at right about the same time that the Declaration of Independence occurred. In other words, this freedom train, this idea of human freedom, that we didn't have to answer to a king, well, it didn't start out perfectly. Yes, slaves didn't have a right to vote. Women didn't have a right to vote. But these guys were creatures of their time. And they were extraordinary for their times. They did stuff so lasting that to judge them only by the fact and circumstance that they had plantations and thus slaves is to utterly reduce them to presentism, to judging them by today's standards, while they lived far ahead in advance of 18th century standards. Yeah. So it's just stupid. It's
weird.
Not thoughtful. And it's sad because once you tell that story to a kid, like I can't tell you how many schools I've been in. I read Newsweek essays. Our shows are heard my shows are heard all over the country, on the air, on big stations, and parents and kids thank us. I didn't know Thomas Jefferson's true feelings about owning slaves. We performed the reading of his last letter, and it weighed on him so deeply because he is the guy who wrote all men are created equal. And he knew slaves were human beings. He knew they weren't cows. He knew they weren't horses, right? He knew this. Washington knew it. He freed his slaves. This is a tragedy, but it was perfectly normal everywhere else in the world to own slaves. And that's the context we have to remind people of. And then let's judge people not only in their times, but look at the good they did. Now the prism is, let's look at how America messed up. One of our favorite stories, a guy named Louise Lim, a Chinese American journalist, went to Beijing and held up a picture of Tank Man to thousands of Chinese. And 90% of them, he said, clearly had blank stares. They'd never even seen the picture. There were another 10%, he said, that he recognized the picture, but they wouldn't admit it. So what I took from that is, wow, China is eliminating what's bad in their history and keeping what's good. We're China in reverse. Mm-hmm. We're eliminating what's good in our history and shining a light on some of the imperfections and some of the imperfect people. By the way, every founder was an imperfect person.
What do you make of somebody like, since you brought him up, Jefferson, who is on record saying, literally, he said slavery is an abomination. And he goes on to expand on that idea, but he said slavery is an abomination. He had a massive plantation filled with slaves, some of whom he had relationships with. One in particular, I believe, he had relationships and children with. And he continued to own the children, technically, I guess. What do you make of, because we do live in a complex world. I think presentism is weird. I think it's like judging, I don't know, first millennia Native Americans. Why didn't they just build a house, man? You know what I mean? Right. Why didn't they have air conditioning? Like, what the fuck are you talking about?
I don't know what you're talking about.
It's weird. But there are some things like the idea of chattel slavery and race-based chattel slavery has been around since the Spartans. They started chattel. They started race-based chattel slavery, but chattel slavery has been around for as long as one group of people is stronger than another group of people. It's just
exactly.
But what do you make of somebody like Jefferson, who said specifically that he was like, this is an abomination, yet he continued to practice? I think that's something.
It makes him human. It makes him human. That's what it makes him. But it also makes the Declaration that much more special, right? He didn't have perfect ideals himself, but he wrote about a country that one day live up to those ideals. You know, I've just written a piece for Newsweek, Calvin Coolidge's 150th anniversary speech on the Declaration Day on July 4th, our nation's birthday. Not particularly, it was the second, but let's just give it the fourth for national unity purpose. It's spectacular. And what he writes about is precisely that. These were human beings who were flawed. They were living in their time, but yet they wrote and signed and put their pen to this charter that changed not just America, it changed the whole world. It essentially said man is not made to be governed by a king. Man is made to self-govern. This is unbelievable, right? And unfortunately, all men then didn't quite mean all men. But my goodness, it does now. And it does in half the world. And there's still slavery in plenty of other places. Look, I have an Arabic last name. And the Middle East is chock full of slavery. And there's apartheid all over the Middle East, gender apartheid. It's everywhere. And so the idea that folks are getting their junk in a bunch because of what America does, when the real culprits now are in the Middle East, sub-Saharan Africa, there's some horrible things happening with the slave trade. It's alive and well, and it's tragic. And human beings will always do ugly things. Jefferson is guilty of being a highly, highly complicated and in some ways very unlikable human being. But that's not the point. It's what he wrote and what he did and what it meant that matters. And I was telling a friend this the other day. Anybody who's been through a marriage for 25 years, I'm going on my 20th anniversary. We're going to have a big party. Can you imagine your friends all gathering together and going, hey, Lee, remember the time you cheated on your wife? Hey, you remember, honey, the time you badmouthed your husband and blew all that money? No, we got through that stuff. We're together and got through our worst days. What kind of idiot, what kind of jerk would do that? Recount the low points. Oh, that's right. The people making the 1619 Project.
Sure, yeah.
That's
it. Yeah, it's silly. Right. It's silly. They're not serious people.
They're not.
It really just is that.
But I can add one thing, though. My dad was a history teacher at a time, and he will confess this. Well, we did burnish slavery. We did burnish segregation. You know, when I was in law school with Laura, the critical race theory visited our school. Derek Bell did. And critical race theory is not like as dumb as everyone says. Anti-racism is crazy, right? That says you're a white person, and if you say you're not racist, that's proof that you're a racist. And only if you go through our anti-racist ideological boot camp will you be labeled an anti-racist and a good white person. But some of the claims of critical race theory are actually really palpable and wise. Take, for instance, what happened during segregation, or take what happened in my own county, Bergen County, New Jersey, when I was growing up. It was hard for us as Lebanese people to get a house in New Jersey because we were dark-skinned, and our black friends couldn't. They were literally blackballed. A black family was not shown an apartment. A black family was not shown a house. And I had friends who were black, and they were stuck in Newark, New Jersey. And the property values after the Newark riots were destroyed. My Italian side of my family, for some reason, unlike our Lebanese side of the family, were able to move into Bergen County. And the house that my grandfather bought for $30,000 was worth $800,000 when he died. But his friend who worked in a factory alongside him had to stay in Newark, and his house that he bought for $30,000 was worth $50,000 when he died. If the state's involved in that kind of discrimination, that's a taking of property. And that's a legitimate discussion to have. This isn't the sins of slavery. This is the sins of, you're black, you can't live over here. You got to live in that crummy part of town where nobody wants to live. So I'm open to having these discussions about mistakes America has made. again, we're not a perfect country. And how we treated blacks, particularly some of the black pilots, we did a story of one Tuskegee airman who came back, fought for his country, raid after raid over Berlin. He couldn't get a job at Pan Am. The Southern customers wouldn't want to see a black pilot. Oh my goodness. He's still alive, right? That guy is still alive. And that was permitted by the Federal Aviation Administration. It shouldn't have been. I'm no DEI guy, and I don't think white people should be discriminated against, but black people were discriminated against for a long time. Let's have that discussion. We don't need to track it all the way back to slavery, for goodness sake. You might as well go back to the people who sold the slaves and ask them for the money. Sure. It's just stupid.
Well, on the idea of reparations, I've heard from some friends of mine in the black community that their idea of reparations would come from the companies that benefited from it, not from taxpayers, which is a debate I guess you could have. A lot of people also don't know that the the reason affirmative action began in the first place wasn't to level the playing field necessarily because some businesses were more competitive. It's because governments around the country so obviously the government doesn't do anything. They hire contractors to do everything, which is why anytime anybody says, what would we do without government? Who would build the roads? The same fucking people that build them now. Idiot. Right. At any rate, the governments around the country, particularly in the Southeast, were passing laws that require. It wasn't even a law. It was they put a government contract out for a construction company or an electric company or something, and one of the laws was a requirement that you had to be in business with a bank account for X amount of years, which is longer than most black-owned businesses had existed. Right. Exactly. And they did it. It was the same as the poll tax or the literacy test for voting or any of this other shit. Like that stuff. If you don't think there's evil assholes in the country, look at the leftists around right now that are trying to pull all this stuff and realize that they're the same people that started the KKK back in the day. Right. It's just the same group of people. Right?
Same group of people. And look, we're the ones who did the McCarthy hearings, and many people thought it was a good idea to permanently cost somebody their job because they were communists. Obscene, right? And by the way, I might add, I may have been one of the only conservative columnists then working for Condé Nast who said, I don't like the word special in front of the word prosecutor as it related to Bill Clinton, that we shouldn't keep an open warrant on a man, starting with cattle futures, Whitewater, this, that, and 2 years later, finding a stain on his dress. Yeah. It offended me. I wasn't a fan of Clinton. And I told all my friends, one day there'll be a special prosecutor on one of our presidents for 3 years. We should be against this. We should be against this kind of hounding of a president. We have elections. Clinton won. Let's wait till the next election. So I just like that consistency because then people start to go, who are you? What do you stand? Oh, my goodness. So that's what conservatives believe. Wow, that wasn't abuse of power. Yes, we hate abuse of power, especially power of the state. That's why we have all the rights we have. The 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendments are essentially saying the state's dangerous. We like our cops, but oh my goodness, and we like our prosecutors. But boy, you got to be careful because boy, they can go too far. And that's why you've got unanimity of jury, you've got speedy trial, you've got the right to not incriminate yourself, you have a right to a lawyer. These 3 amendments are serious. And there was a serious suspicion about too much state power, and rightfully so. We can have evil people who believe the same things we do, but they're bad dudes or bad gals. And we have some. We can't act like we don't. Evil is a pretty equal opportunity employer.
It is, yeah. And it again, one of the reasons I always caution people not to celebrate political wins is because it may be good for you now, right? But let's wait and see. When that power's in the hands of the next guy, we'll see how it works out for you. And you mentioned before about the founders coming to an agreement. And a lot of people, I think a lot of people still think of the founders as just aristocrats from Britain who came here for a new life. George Washington was not an aristocrat from Britain, right? That came here for a new life. He was a Virginian, as was Thomas Jefferson, although he had some friends in the French court. And Adams, as you mentioned, was a farmer. Ben Franklin was a scientist. These are people who are just like, we've read The Preceptor, we've read John Locke. We're just tired of your bullshit. We're not going to do this anymore. Yes. They were mostly common folk, and they did come to the idea or to the conclusion that men aren't meant to be governed by anyone but themselves. And look, if it weren't for the French and Indian War, I mean, look, we got to remember what precipitated all this, right?
The British defended us, right? They spent some money and they wanted the money back. And they didn't know what to do about it. And we'd been self-governing for a really long time without any help from the British. They had a really light footprint here. They were sort of letting us be. And we did. And boy, did we do government well. And boy, did we run our own houses well. And boy, we had laws because we had all that great, rich history from British common law all the way back to the Magna Carta. So we were taking the best of the British, but we were doing it ourselves. We were doing self-rule. And so when the Brits came in and said, we need some of our money back, we're like, nah, that's okay. And then they kept laying the pressure on the writs of assistance, the warrants, the Star Chamber, and they just kept laying the footprint on. And they thought they'd cut essentially they thought they would cut Boston off from the rest of the country. And if you ever get a chance to read the King's address to Parliament after we signed the Declaration, he basically calls the Americans who side with the Jeffersons of this world and Franklin's the deluded multitude. These are the King's words, the deluded multitude. And he also makes an offer. He says, look, I can understand why you've all lost your minds, but here's what I'm going to say. When we come over there to fight, I will offer anybody who's sided with the Patriots a full pardon. By the way, that speech he thought would have the effect of rallying folks to his side. It had the unintended consequence. Thomas Paine wrote his second series of essays, The American Crisis, and it brought the colonies together. So that sounds a lot like today. I was waiting for the King to call the American people deplorables.
Yeah, and it's, what they can't. One of the other conclusions the founders came to was that I think best encapsulated in the quote "a republic if you can keep it," right? Which is which kind of implies that there's some level of responsibility on you, and that's kind of the premise of this show: is that you can bitch and moan about your rights, and you can wait around for somebody to secure them for you, and you will be a subject under their rule, just like everybody has been throughout history. Or you can secure them yourself by performing the responsibilities required of you to do so, and that's what makes you a citizen, literally. By the way, this week you might hear people say something like, you're standing on stolen land. I just want you to remind them that they're standing on conquered land. And there's a notable difference between the two. And if they would like to try to conquer it back, they're welcome to try. And also, if they feel like they're on stolen land at their own home, they're welcome to give it away.
Well, look, and you got to remember, there were anytime there are conquerors and there are losers, that always stinks. That's happened all throughout history forever. So that's just sort of a rule of the game. But, the largest landowner in America is the federal government. They own a third. State governments own 10% of all the land, 10% of the whole country. We're talking about 2 billion acres. And American Indians and their tribes own 60 million acres. 60 million acres. And that's a lot of land. And so, look, there have been the Trail of Tears, when you read Tocqueville writing about the Trail of Tears, because he actually bumped into it before it even happened. He was watching the removal of Indians from their native land. And he predicted that this would be troubled because they were going to stay here. There wasn't a repatriation to another country. And so, look, you're right that these are conquered lands. They are. But it doesn't mean that part of the harm done to American Indians isn't real. It's just the reality of every war and the reality of every expanding nation. And in the end, there was also an internal battle that every indigenous culture fights within and amongst itself, which is modernity versus tribalism. And in the end, that tug towards the fifth or sixth generation wanting the iPhone, wanting to live in the city, maintain their ethnic heritage, but move along, let it go. It's 400 years old now.
Yeah. By the way, this is the same.
2,000 years, you're still going to be lamenting this loss.
This is the same fight that's going on in global Islam right now. As a matter of fact, what you're talking about that went on for about 250 years in the United States between Native American tribes and the choice to either modernize or get fucked up. That's what's happening in the Islamic world right now. And to be honest, it kind of seems like the American intelligence communities don't want them to modernize, frankly, for whatever. You can draw your own conclusions on that. But even MBS in Saudi Arabia is doing everything he can to drag that country into modernity. He's like, Saudi Arabia is still 80% of the schools are madrasas, death to America bullshit. But you're talking about a global leader at this point, like one of the probably top 10 most important state leaders in the world. And one of the most problematic countries that exists as well, Saudi Arabia, doing a lot. I think like people give him a lot of shit about a lot of different things, but I feel like he's doing a pretty good job dragging them into modernity, in spite of everybody trying to stop him.
It's hard to judge a man out of his context. We were just talking about that. And look, I'm an Arab American, and I've written in support of Israel for a very long time. And I've always said there are two kinds of Arabs. By the way, most Arabs are Muslims now. It's over 90% of Arabs, right? And so the Christian population has been winnowed down over time. I'm a Lebanese Christian, but people assume I'm Muslim, and I don't take any offense at that. The problem isn't Islam itself, right? It's the wedding of Islam to these countries that spread this rank propaganda about Jews. And these aren't open societies. But in an essay I wrote called Arab Like Me, I said, look, there are two kinds of Arabs I bump into in my life: those who hate Jews and those who pretend to. There's a permission slip that needs to be granted to many Arabs to say what they actually think about their relationship to Israel. In the same way for African Americans, many are getting close to that point where they don't care if you call them an Uncle Tom. They don't care if you try and kick them out of the family. I was called an Uncle Ahab all the way back in 1983 because I wrote a column in the Fairleigh Dickinson Gauntlet. I was the editor-in-chief, in which I wrote as a Lebanese person that the American troops should have been in Beirut, that they should have been in there because they're protecting not only that republic, but also this remarkable place called Israel. My Arab friends took me over the coals. They had no idea that I would dare to speak ugly of many of the trends of Islam after the mullahs took over in Iran. And they changed things. There was a battle going on for the heart and soul of Islam between what you were talking about, the traditionalists who want to take Islam back to the 15th century, and the modernists who want to take Islam into the 21st century. And many Muslims that I've come to know in this country don't want Sharia law. They don't want to go back in the day and join the mullahs in Iran. They came to America to get away from that stuff. And so to color these groups in large swaths, always an epic mistake. And what Jared Kushner did with Donald Trump, with the Abraham Accords, was absolutely brilliant, because they decided, and I'll never forget, because if you read Jared's book, and it's a terrific glimpse into the Trump White House, Trump saw this as real estate. And he said, there's a lot of real estate in the Middle East. Why are we treating the Palestinians like the anchor tenant? Let's visit the other tenants. Let's see what they really think off the books. And let's see if we could get 4 or 5 of them to join at once, rather than have one of them stick their necks out alone. And what we learned from the book, and actually just from the Abraham Accords themselves, was that the Middle East was starting to come to grips with the idea that MBS was right, that we needed to move into the 21st century and bring Islam along, right? And many of the Muslims who wanted that. And the battle is within Islam. The battle was in the Christian community during our Reformation. Every great religion has a Reformation. And Islam is perhaps at the very beginning of theirs. And it's going to be a slog. And it's going to get ugly, because Reformations generally get ugly.
Yeah. I mean, it's, the way that Muhammad started it in the first place was to, Islam was, he borrowed Allah, which was a pagan god among many, right? But he used it as a unification figure in the same way that religions had before, right? I mean, that's why Constantine converted to Christianity in the first place, was to keep the church together. I think Justinian later on tried to outlaw paganism entirely, to bring all the Christians together to fight against the Persian advances and all this stuff. It's happened year after year. But the Abraham Accords, after they went from the UAE to Bahrain, from the UAE to Bahrain. First they got UAE to sign, then Bahrain. My first instinct was to Google the richest Muslim countries, right? And you see Qatar, Kuwait, who are already friendly with us. And then UAE, Oman, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, by the way, all of whom were targeted for the Abraham Accords. And once, if Trump gets reelected, I'm sure they will all sign it, because for the first time in history, we saw Saudi Arabia actually defend Israel from incoming rockets, which is interesting.
That's right.
But yeah, it's like one of the most brilliant moves of geopolitics behind the scenes I think I've ever seen was to get like.
Howard did not win a Nobel Prize.
I have no idea. That should have won, like Kushner and Trump should have won a Nobel Peace Prize for that, frankly.
You know, just the picture of that airplane flying over airspace that it had never flown over before, the LLL airline. And I don't know if you've ever seen the picture. There was the crescent, there was a cross, and there was the star, and there was the Star of David. And then it was the word love in Islam, in Hebrew. No, peace in Hebrew, in Arabic, and in English.
Yeah, it's wild. And the people like yourself who come from these places, speak out about it. I can think of, let's see, Salman Rushdie, Ayan Hirsi Ali, Gad Saad, just a number of people. Yeah. Gad Saad actually from Lebanon as well. People who have come from this part of the world who are like, can we just like act like adults? Because that's the difference. People think that for some reason, a lot of Christians in America think that Islam is intrinsically violent. I'm like, I can find some pretty violent periods in your time as well, but
exactly.
What you're seeing are people who refuse to grow up, right? And I don't mean, certainly there's many, I have Muslim friends, there's many people who are not like that, but the strategies being used so far have not been great, frankly, by those countries and by the Western countries who are trying to modernize them. I don't think the Western countries can modernize them. As a matter of fact, I think something like the Ottoman Empire has to reemerge, and not necessarily geographically, but some leader in the Middle East has got to stand up and say, you know what, fuck this stupid shit. We're not doing this. It's costing us too much money and too many lives to do this. We're rich. We have oil. What are we doing?
Look, we got to remember, we had guys like Martin Luther King and a bunch of different interests marching to say, we're not doing this anymore. We're not doing this anymore. And that's what it takes. This is going to be an internal battle. There's very little effect the West is going to have on the East. And I think the harder we try, the harder it becomes. Yeah, but if we find our pockets of opportunity, that's a different thing. We got to be careful of our footprint. It's got to come from a deep desire within. And it's there. And I've never talked to more Muslim friends, Arabic friends, especially after 10/7. Especially after 10/7, which, by the way, it was no coincidence that 10/7 happened not that long after the Abraham Accords. I mean, this was not good news for the radicals, the Abraham Accords. And these allegiances that were about to be signed, or at least had a high degree of probability of being signed with Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
And so it's no accident this happened, when it happened, and where it happened.
Yeah, and it's just like the American military-industrial complex. Follow the money. You have very rich people sitting in the gaps in these black markets that are funding weapons and terrorism, who are playing on the sympathies of illiterate fucking tribal people. And it's the same thing that's happened throughout all of human history. It's the same thing that happened here after 9/11, actually. And we could all read. We were still too dumb to figure it out. Well, we can talk about this all day, but I got to get going. But tell me about Our American Stories, and then give me one of your favorites.
Sure. Look, we tell stories about everything each and every night. There's no real interviews. We interview people, then we take the interviewer out, and we turn these into mini documentaries. There are 3 to 4 of them a night. We've been doing it now since 2016, and the whole idea was tell the story of America to Americans. We do sports stories, music stories. You just heard the John Adams story. We have David McCullough telling that story from the grave. We've commissioned with the Stephen Ambrose estate. Ambrose, by the way, my favorite is Ambrose talking about one factory, Willow Run, a Ford factory. Ford, an anti-Semite, right? And a noted anti-Semite. Well, that's true. But without Ford's talents, his engineering talents, America would have been in big trouble. And here's why. Because that Willow Run factory that used to make cars was turning out a B-24 bomber almost every minute.
Holy shit.
And 19,000 of them in total between our industrial power. So capitalism helped win the war, and Henry Ford and his genius for manufacturing and the American genius for innovation and in the end, our industrial capacity won that war. And it wasn't just our soldiers, as great as they were, and it wasn't our spiritual and moral power alone. If we couldn't have made that many planes we would in big trouble. So we have my favorite hour is Henry Ford, I Invented the Human, and it's all of his warts and all. But it is, when you're done, you go, wow, what a contribution to American life that the automobile made. And bringing the price, how Ford got rich was bringing the price of the car down so the kings and nobility weren't the only people who could afford it. Ford ended up making better and more reliable cars for the average American to use. He also gave them a living wage because the industrial and manufacturing power was ultimately an interesting way to make a living aside from simply farming. So there were other things to do in your life if you grew up in the middle of Iowa or Michigan besides do what your father and grandfather did.
Yeah, and by the way, not because he was a particularly good man. He just wanted more customers, which is why capitalism is pretty fucking dope, to be honest.
That's right. Dead right.
And by the way, you guys tell stories about. Also, on that note, look up how the Dodge brothers sued Ford to try to keep them from lowering their prices.
Exactly.
They tried to stop them because they wanted publicly traded companies to only have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders. It's a really interesting case. But you guys talk about stuff like that all the way back to abolitionists like John Brown, the rise of the NBA. I mean, it isn't just about the founding of the country. It's the entirety of American history. It's a very interesting show. You can start anywhere in the list of shows, and it's all interesting. I really enjoy it.
Great. Well, I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. And thank you for coming today. Tell everybody where they can find you.
OurAmericanStories.com or anywhere you get your podcasts. Our American Stories.
And you guys do video as well, or is it all audio?
Or only an audio experience. On Facebook, you get to see a lot of the beautiful work we do video-wise. But we want ours to be an audio experience only. There's a tremendous amount of time spent on the music, on the soundtracks. So when you're listening, you're not just listening to a guy talk. Oh, it sounds like theater. There are dramatic breaks. We stage every story in acts. There's an act 1, an act 2, and an act 3. And always there's a linchpin turning event and then a resolution.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for coming today. We appreciate your time.
You bet. Thank you.
Yes, sir. And everybody go to ouramericanstories.com or check them out on any podcast app. And thank you for listening. This has been Citizen.